The first frost came early to Lake Geneva that year, turning the world silver and sharp. I stood at the iron gates of Coleman Cottage, my grandfather's lake house, staring at the new padlock glinting in the weak October sunlight. Behind me, my mother's Mercedes idled in the driveway, engine purring like a satisfied cat. Linda Thompson stepped out, her heels crunching on the frosted gravel, a smile playing at her lips that didn't reach her eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You can't be here anymore, Rebecca. She said it so casually like she was commenting on the weather. This property is family only now. Real family. I felt the words land like stones in my chest. Real family. As if 28 years of being her daughter suddenly counted for nothing. As if the man who raised me every summer on this lake, who taught me to sail and fish and see the world with wonder, hadn't left this place specifically to me. The deed was in my name. The will was filed. The attorney had shaken my hand just 14 months ago and said, "Your grandfather wanted you to have his heart, and his heart was always here." But my mother stood there, blocking the path to the porch where Frank Coleman used to sit with his morning coffee, and she acted like none of that had ever happened. "Derek's moving in next week," she continued, adjusting her sunglasses. "We're turning it into a retreat center. Wellness and meditation. Very exclusive." Her new boyfriend, a man I'd met exactly twice, both times watching him check his phone while my mother talked. A man who smiled with too many teeth and touched her lower back with the kind of possessive certainty that made my skin crawl. I held up my phone, pulling up the scan deed. "Grandpa left this to me. It's legally mine. You can't just take it." She laughed. "Actually, honey, I can. There were some irregularities in the paperwork. My lawyer's handling it. You'll get a small settlement, of course. We're not unreasonable. But this house stays in the family." She turned back toward her car, then paused. "Oh, and I've notified the police that you've been trespassing. If you come back, they'll arrest you." "Understood." The gates closed between us with a metallic clang that echoed across the frozen water. I watched her drive away, red taillights disappearing down the pine-lined road, and something inside me crystallized. It wasn't anger yet. It was colder than that. It was clarity. My name is Rebecca Thompson. And that morning, standing outside the home my grandfather built with his own hands, the home he promised would always be mine, I realized my mother hadn't just locked me out of a house. She declared war on everything Frank Coleman had tried to protect. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd forgotten that I was his granddaughter. And he'd taught me to finish what I started. 3 weeks earlier, the phone call had come on a Tuesday. I was at my desk in Milwaukee, reviewing architectural plans for a community center renovation, when my mother's name flashed across the screen. We hadn't spoken in 2 months, not since she'd skipped my birthday dinner to fly to Sedona with Derek for some corporate spiritual retreat. Her voice had that brittle brightness she used when she wanted something. "Becca, darling, I need you to sign some papers. Just routine estate stuff. Your grandfather's accounts, finalizing the will, nothing important. Can you meet me at the lake house this weekend?" I should have felt suspicious immediately. My mother never called anything routine, and she certainly never invited me anywhere without an audience to witness her playing the devoted parent. But I missed the lake house. I missed the way morning light hit the water through the pine trees. I missed my grandfather's workshop in the basement, the smell of sawdust and old leather. I missed the life I'd had before he died. Before my mother swooped in and started talking about legacy and family reputation and all the things Frank Coleman had never cared about. So I drove up that Saturday, leaves turning gold and crimson along Highway 50, the lake appearing between the trees like glimpses of sky fallen to earth. The house looked different. The flower boxes my grandfather had maintained were empty. The American flag he'd flown every day since his Navy service hung crooked and faded. The rocking chairs on the porch sat at odd angles, like someone had moved them without understanding their purpose. My mother waited inside with a man in an expensive suit. She introduced him as Richard Voss, her estate attorney. He had papers spread across my grandfather's dining table, the one Frank had built from reclaimed barn wood, and he smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who spent his life convincing people to sign things they shouldn't. "Just a few signatures, Rebecca. Your mother is consolidating the estate assets for tax purposes. Very standard." This ensures everything stays properly managed. I read through the documents or tried to. The language was dense, purposefully obscure. But I caught phrases that made my stomach tighten. Transfer of deed authority. Revocable interest. Restructured inheritance distribution. This says I'm giving up my inheritance rights. I looked up at my mother. Why would I do that? She sighed, that particular exhale she perfected that made you feel like you were being difficult. Honey, you're being paranoid. This just puts everything into a family trust. You'll still have access. It's better for everyone this way. Cleaner. But I already have the deed. Grandpa left me the house outright. The attorney cleared his throat. Actually, Miss Thompson, there's some question about the validity of that original transfer. Your grandfather was quite elderly when he made those arrangements. There may have been some confusion about his intentions. The room seemed to tilt. My grandfather had been 79 when he died, but his mind had been sharp as lake ice. He'd planned everything meticulously, even writing me letters to open on future birthdays, each one sealed and dated. Confusion wasn't possible. I stood up, gathering the unsigned papers. I need to think about this. I'm not signing anything today. My mother's smile froze. Becca, don't be childish. This is important. It's not childish to want my own lawyer to review documents that give away my inheritance. Her eyes went cold. Your inheritance. Frank was my father. Everything he had came from our family. You're acting like he loved you more than his own daughter. The words hung in the air between us, naked and raw. That was exactly what she believed. That her father had chosen me over her. That every summer I'd spent at the lake house was somehow stolen from her. That his love was a finite resource I'd hoarded for myself. I left without signing. I left with those papers clutched in my hand and my mother calling after me. About lawyers and family loyalty and how disappointed Frank would be in my selfishness. I drove back to Milwaukee with my hands shaking on the wheel, and I called the attorney who'd handled my grandfather's original will. James Brennan was semi-retired, living in Madison, but he remembered me immediately. Rebecca Coleman's granddaughter. Frank talked about you constantly. How can I help? I explained about the papers, the new attorney, my mother's sudden urgency. There was a long silence on the line. Don't sign anything. Not a single page. I need to make some calls. Your grandfather came to me specifically because he was worried about something like this. He made me promise to watch over that transfer. Can you come to my office Monday morning? We sat in his book-lined office overlooking the Capitol, autumn sun slanting through old glass, and he spread out the original will. Everything was in order. Frank Coleman had left the lake house, his boat, his personal accounts, and his workshop contents entirely to me. The will was ironclad. He'd had it reviewed by 3 separate attorneys. He'd even included a letter of intent explaining his reasoning, his distinctive handwriting covering 2 full pages. I leave Coleman Cottage to my granddaughter Rebecca because she understands what I built there. Not just the house but the life, the quiet mornings, the respect for the water, the community we created together. My daughter Linda sees only investment value in social status. Rebecca sees home. This is not a rejection of Linda. This is a protection of what matters most. James Brennan looked at me over his reading glasses. Your mother can't break this will, Rebecca. It's legally airtight. But she can make your life hell trying. Has she done anything else? Anything that might constitute harassment or illegal interference? Not yet. But she banned me from the property today. Called me a trespasser in my own house. He wrote something in his notebook. I'm going to send her attorney a cease and desist. And I'm going to request a copy of any new documents they've filed regarding the estate. If they've tried to challenge the will formally, we'll know. But Rebecca, you need to be careful. People do desperate things when money and property are involved. Watch your back. I left his office feeling slightly more grounded, but the unease followed me home. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's face the last time I'd seen him, 3 weeks before the stroke that killed him. We'd been sitting on the dock, watching the sun set over Silver Bay, and he'd squeezed my hand. This place is yours now, Becca. Don't let anyone tell you different. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I built it for family, real family, the kind you choose with your heart. Promise me you'll fight for it if you have to. I'd promised. I just hadn't imagined fighting would mean going to war with my own mother. The next 2 weeks crawled past. James sent the cease and desist. My mother's attorney responded with a letter so full of legal threats and accusations that I had to read it 3 times to understand they were calling my grandfather mentally incompetent, and me an opportunistic manipulator. They were filing to contest the will. They claimed Frank had been unduly influenced. They said I'd isolated him from his daughter and poisoned him against her. The lies were so brazen, so completely inverted from reality, that I almost laughed. Almost. But then I remembered my mother's face at the lake house, that cold certainty in her eyes. She actually believed this narrative. Or she decided to believe it because it justified what she wanted to do. On a Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Nicole Parker, my oldest friend. We'd grown up together on the lake, spent every childhood summer racing sailboats and building forts in the woods. She'd moved to Green Bay for work but still visited her parents every weekend. Her voice was tight with anger. "Becca, I just drove past Coleman Cottage. There are construction trucks everywhere. They're putting up a fence. A big one like 8 feet tall all around the property." My stomach dropped. They can't do that. It's not their property. I called James immediately. He made more calls, sent more letters, but the construction continued. By the weekend, the entire lake house was surrounded by new fencing, blocked from the road, invisible from the water. My mother had literally walled me out of my inheritance. I drove up on Sunday morning, the first real cold snap of the season, turning my breath to fog. The fence was worse in person. Black vinyl, professional installation with a gate that required a code. Through the slats I could see lights on in the house. Movement behind the windows. I walked down to the public beach access, the little strip of sand where the town held summer concerts. From there I could see the lake house across the water. The dock where my grandfather had taught me to fish. The boathouse where his restored 1947 Chris Craft still waited, or should have waited. As I watched, a figure emerged onto the porch. Derek, my mother's boyfriend. He stood there drinking coffee from my grandfather's favorite mug, the one that said Captain Frank, and he looked out over the water like he owned it. Like he'd earned it. Like my grandfather's 50 years of loving this place meant nothing compared to his bank account and his wellness retreat fantasies. Something in me snapped then. Not into anger. Into focus. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The fence. The house. Derek on the porch. Then I opened my email and started writing to every contact I had in the Lake Geneva community. The Historical Society. The Sailing Club. The town council members who'd known my grandfather. The neighbors who'd watched me grow up summer after summer. I didn't accuse anyone. I just asked a simple question. Did you know Coleman Cottage has been locked up and fenced off? Frank Coleman's granddaughter, the legal inheritor, is being denied access to her own property. I thought you should know. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. Then I drove back to Milwaukee and started digging. If my mother wanted to rewrite history, I would find the truth and make it undeniable. I started with my grandfather's papers. He'd given me boxes of his personal documents years ago, everything from his Navy discharge papers to the original deed when he'd bought the land in 1972. I'd stored them in my apartment closet, meaning to organize them someday. Now I spread everything across my living room floor and started reading. Letters, receipts, photographs, a meticulous record of a meticulous life. And there, in a manila envelope marked important, I found something that made my hands shake. A notarized letter from my grandfather, dated 6 months before he died, addressed to the Lake Geneva Zoning Board. To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally state that I oppose any commercial development of Coleman Cottage after my death. This property was built as a family home and community gathering place. It is my express wish that it remain a private residence. My daughter Linda Thompson has approached me multiple times about converting the property into a commercial venture. I have refused each time. This letter serves as my permanent objection to any such plans. Should anyone attempt to rezone or commercially develop this property after I am gone, they do so against my explicitly stated wishes. Signed, Frank Coleman. I read it 3 times. Then I called James Brennan. He answered on the second ring. I found something. I told him about the letter. The line went quiet for a moment. Rebecca, this changes things. If your mother is planning commercial development, and your grandfather formally objected, that gives us leverage. But we need to know what she's actually planning. Do you have any proof of her intentions? Just what she told me. The wellness retreat. He was quiet again, thinking. We need more. We need documentation. Permits, business plans, anything that shows she's violating your grandfather's wishes. Can you get inside the house? It's my house. Legally, yes. But if she's filed trespassing warnings with the police, you could be arrested. It's complicated. We need to be smart about this. I hung up and sat with my grandfather's letter in my hands. The paper was crisp, official. His signature was strong and clear. This was a man who knew exactly what he was doing, who understood that his daughter would try exactly what she was trying. He'd prepared for this. He tried to protect his legacy from beyond the grave. But he'd underestimated how ruthless Linda Thompson could be. Or maybe he'd understood perfectly, and that's why he'd written the letter in the first place. That night I dreamed of the lake house. In the dream I walked through rooms that were empty, stripped of everything that made them Frank Coleman's home. The photos were gone from the walls, the books from the shelves. Even the smell was wrong, sterile and chemical instead of pine and coffee and old wood. I woke at 3 in the morning, heart racing, and I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't wait for lawyers and legal processes. My mother was erasing my grandfather. Every day I delayed, more of him disappeared. By dawn I'd made a decision. If they wanted to play games with fences and locks and legal threats, fine. But they'd forgotten something important. Frank Coleman had taught me everything about that house. Every secret. Every hidden space. Including the one way in that no fence could block. The tunnel. The November wind cut across Silver Bay like a knife, turning the water dark and restless. I stood at the edge of the public access point, wrapped in my grandfather's old sailing jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of his aftershave, and the lake itself. It was 2 in the morning, and the town slept under a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to touch. The kind of night Frank Coleman used to call perfect for secrets. Nicole stood beside me, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. She'd driven down from Green Bay the moment I'd called, no questions asked, just like when we were kids and one of us needed the other. Now she stared at the dark shape of Coleman Cottage across the water, its windows black and empty behind that ridiculous fence. You're absolutely sure about this? Her voice was low, careful. Because if they catch us, your mother will have actual grounds to call you a criminal. I pulled the small flashlight from my pocket, tested it once, then clicked it off. I'm not breaking into someone else's property. I'm entering my own house through a door my grandfather built specifically so I could always get in. There's a difference. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Okay, but I'm coming with you. If you're doing this, you're not doing it alone. We walked along the shoreline, away from the cottage, toward the rocky outcropping that jutted into the water like a crooked finger. Most people thought it was just natural formation, but Frank had told me the truth when I was 16. During Prohibition, this whole area was a smuggler's route. People moved Canadian whiskey across the lake and needed ways to hide it. The man who owned this land before me, he built a tunnel from that outcropping straight to what's now my basement. Clever bastard. Used it for 30 years before anyone knew it existed. He'd shown me the entrance then, hidden behind a carefully stacked pile of stones that looked completely natural unless you knew which ones to move. We'd climb through together, him laughing at my wonder, the tunnel cool and damp and smelling of earth and old stone. It's our secret, Becca. Emergency exit, emergency entrance. Just in case you ever need it. I never thought I'd need it to enter my own home like a thief in the night. But here I was, kneeling in the frozen dirt, moving stones that were exactly where I'd left them 8 years ago. The opening appeared, a dark mouth in the earth about 3 feet high. Cold air exhaled from it, carrying that same ancient smell. Nicole crouched beside me, peering into the darkness. Jesus, this is really here. You're sure it goes all the way through? Only one way to find out. I clicked on the flashlight and started crawling. The tunnel was narrower than I remembered, or maybe I was bigger. The walls were shored up with old timber that creaked and groaned as we passed. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. The beam of my flashlight caught ancient bottles embedded in the walls, Prohibition-era whiskey containers left behind like artifacts. Frank had loved that detail. History doesn't disappear, he'd said. It just gets buried. Our job is to remember where we put it. We crawled for what felt like forever but was probably only 5 minutes. My hands were numb, my knees aching. Then the tunnel opened up slightly and I saw the stairs. Wooden, steep, leading up to a trapdoor in what should be my grandfather's basement workshop. I paused at the bottom, listening. Nothing. No footsteps above, no voices, no sound except our breathing and that distant drip of water. I climbed slowly, testing each step before putting my weight on it. The wood held. At the top, I pressed my hand against the trapdoor. It was hinged from above, designed to blend seamlessly with the basement floor. Frank had covered it with a piece of old carpet and a workbench. If they'd moved the furniture, we were in trouble. I pushed gently. Resistance, then give. The trapdoor lifted an inch, then 2. No alarm. No shouts. I pushed it all the way open and pulled myself up into the darkness of the basement. Nicole followed and we stood there for a moment, letting our eyes adjust. The workshop was wrong. That was my first thought. Frank's tools were gone from the pegboard walls. His projects, the half-finished birdhouse and the boat motor he'd been rebuilding, all vanished. The workbench was pushed against the far wall, covered with plastic drop cloths. Paint cans sat stacked in the corner, expensive brands. The kind you use for commercial renovation. Nicole whispered close to my ear. They're gutting it. They're erasing everything. I moved toward the stairs leading up to the main house, every sense alert. The steps creaked under my feet, the same sounds they'd made my whole life. And for a moment I was 10 years old again, sneaking downstairs for midnight cookies while Grandpa pretended to sleep. But when I opened the door at the top, the familiar vanished completely. The kitchen was demolished. Cabinets ripped from the walls, exposing raw studs and old plaster. The floor was torn up, subfloor visible. My grandfather's kitchen table, the one where we'd eaten 1,000 meals, was gone. In its place sat building plans spread across a folding table, held down by a coffee cup and a bottle of expensive scotch. I crossed to the table, hands shaking. The plans were detailed, professional. Not for a family home. For a commercial facility. Wellness Retreat Center, the header read. Coleman Cottage Luxury Healing Space. I felt sick. The drawings showed the house transformed beyond recognition. Walls removed, the living room converted to a meditation hall, bedrooms replaced with treatment rooms. The porch enclosed in glass. The dock expanded to accommodate 30 guests. Every single thing that made this place my grandfather's home, eliminated in favor of exposed beams and minimalist furniture, and reclaimed wood that had no history, no meaning, nothing real. Nicole photographed the plans with her phone, page after page. At the bottom of the stack, we found the business registration. Coleman Wellness LLC, filed 3 weeks ago. Primary owners, Linda Thompson and Derek Hutchinson. Estimated annual revenue, $500,000. I moved through the rest of the house like a ghost. The living room was stripped to the studs. The fireplace where Frank had read me stories was covered in plastic. The stairs to the second floor were missing half their railings. Upstairs was worse. My grandfather's bedroom, where he'd died peacefully in his sleep, was unrecognizable. They'd removed the built-in bookcases he'd constructed by hand. The window seat where I'd spent rainy afternoons reading was gone, ripped out and replaced with a rough opening for what the plans called a luxury bathroom suite. I stood in the center of the empty room and felt tears burning my eyes. This was desecration. This was erasure. My mother wasn't just stealing property. She was destroying memory, demolishing the physical evidence that Frank Coleman had ever existed as anything more than a name on a deed. Get what you came for, Nicole said gently. We can't stay long. She was right. I moved to the closet, or where the closet had been. They'd removed the door, but the space remained. I knelt in the back corner, feeling along the baseboard until I found the loose panel. Frank had shown me this hiding spot when I was 12, after my mother had gone through my diary without permission during a visit. Some things need to stay private, he'd said. Some things are just yours. The panel came away, and behind it was the small fireproof box exactly where we'd left it. I pulled it out, hands trembling. Inside were documents. My grandfather's original land purchase from 1972. The blueprints he'd drawn himself for the house. Letters between him and my grandmother, who died before I was born. His Navy medals. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. Open if Linda tries anything, the envelope said. He'd known. He'd prepared. I slipped the box into my backpack and replaced the panel. We needed to leave. Now. But as we turned toward the stairs, light suddenly flooded the hallway. Footsteps. Heavy, confident. A man's voice called out. Hello? Security company. Someone tripped the perimeter alarm. Come out now or I'm calling the police. My heart stopped. Nicole grabbed my arm, eyes wide with panic. We backed toward the bedroom, but there was nowhere to go. The window was painted shut. The only exit was past whoever was coming up those stairs. Think. The man appeared at the top of the stairs, flashlight beam sweeping the hall. He was large, wearing a uniform shirt with Sentinel security embroidered on the pocket. His hand rested on something at his belt, a radio or maybe pepper spray. I stepped forward before Nicole could stop me, hands raised and visible. I'm Rebecca Thompson. This is my house. I have every legal right to be here. The guard's flashlight found my face, blinding. He didn't lower it. Ma'am, I have explicit instructions that you're not allowed on this property. The owner filed a restraining order. That's impossible. I am the owner. My grandfather left me this house. His expression didn't change. Ma'am, I need you to leave immediately, or I will contact the police. They'll arrest you for trespassing and breaking and entering. I didn't break in. I used a private entrance that's been in this property for 90 years. An entrance I have legal right to use. He reached for his radio. This is your last warning. Nicole stepped up beside me. We're leaving. Come on, Becca. It's not worth getting arrested. She was right, but everything in me rebelled against retreating. Against letting them win. Against leaving this house to be destroyed by people who'd never loved it. The guard waited, radio in hand. I could see he'd already made up his mind to call it in. This was going to end with handcuffs and charges and my mother's lawyer using it as proof that I was unstable, dangerous, exactly what they'd claimed. We walked past him down the stairs through the ruined kitchen. He followed 3 steps behind, flashlight never wavering. At the front door he stopped us. How did you get in? The tunnel, I said. Prohibition tunnel from the shoreline. Runs right into the basement. He blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. There's no tunnel on any property survey. That's because it predates the survey by 40 years. My grandfather showed me when I was a kid. It's how bootleggers moved whiskey during the 20s. You can check the historical records if you don't believe me. His hand moved to his radio again. Out. Now. We walked across the front porch, past the empty flower boxes, down the steps to the driveway. The fence gate stood open, and beyond it I could see my car parked on the road where I'd left it. The guard followed us all the way to the property line, then stood watching as we got in and drove away. Neither Nicole nor I spoke until we were back in Milwaukee, sitting in my apartment at 4 in the morning with coffee neither of us wanted. She broke the silence first. They have security now. 24-hour guards. This isn't just your mother being spiteful anymore, Becca. This is organized. Professional. I opened the fireproof box, spreading the contents across my table. The documents, the letters, the sealed envelope. My hand shook as I broke the wax seal Frank had pressed there himself. Inside were 3 pages in his careful handwriting, dated 2 months before his death. My dearest Becca, the letter began. If you're reading this, then Linda has done what I feared she would. I'm sorry. I should have prepared you better. Should have warned you how far she might go. But I kept hoping she'd surprise me. That she'd respect my wishes even if she didn't agree with them. I was wrong. What you need to understand is that your mother has always seen the world as a competition. Every relationship, every possession, every moment of happiness is something that could be taken from someone else. When you were born, I hoped you might heal that in her. Instead, you became the ultimate proof of her failure. You loved freely. You found joy easily. You didn't need to take from others to feel whole. She never forgave you for that. The lake house became a symbol of everything she believed I'd denied her. It didn't matter that I'd spent decades trying to share it with her, inviting her for weekends and holidays she never attended. It didn't matter that she'd called it boring and provincial and beneath her ambitions. What mattered was that you loved it. And I loved you for loving it. That made it valuable to her. Not the property itself. The fact that losing it would hurt you. I wish I could tell you this will be easy. That the law will protect you, that justice is simple and fair. It won't be. Linda has money, connections, and absolutely no shame about lying to get what she wants. She'll paint me as senile. She'll paint you as manipulative. She'll construct a narrative where she's the victim and you're the villain. And she'll believe it completely. People like your mother don't see themselves as they are. They see themselves as they need to be to justify what they do. But you have something she doesn't have. You have the truth. You have these documents, this letter, and you have the community that knew me and knows what I wanted. You have the lake itself, which remembers everything even when people forget. And most importantly, you have my absolute certainty that you deserve this house. Not because of blood or law, but because you understand what I built here. A place where love matters more than possession. Where memories matter more than money. Fight for it, Becca. Not just because it's yours legally, though it is. Fight for it because letting people like Linda win means letting them rewrite history. Means letting them turn love into a transaction and family into a business. Fight for it because I couldn't, because I'll be gone and she'll count on that. She'll count on you being too kind, too reasonable, too afraid of conflict to stand up to your own mother. Prove her wrong. Be as stubborn as I taught you. Be as fierce as the lake in winter. And remember that I love you. Always have. Always will. Even when you read this and I'm nothing but memory and old photographs, my love is as real and solid as the ground you stand on. Don't let anyone take that from you. Don't let anyone make you doubt it. The house is yours. The life you build in it is yours. And the truth, no matter how deeply they try to bury it, is yours too. Dig it up. Bring it into the light. Make them see what they tried to destroy. With all my love, Grandpa Frank. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Nicole sat across from me, crying too, though she'd never met him. When I finally looked up, the first gray light of dawn was seeping through my windows. My phone buzzed. A text from James Brennan. Call me immediately. I have news. His voice was tight when he answered. Rebecca, your mother's attorney filed an emergency motion this morning. They're requesting an immediate injunction preventing you from entering the property pending resolution of the will contest. They're also requesting a psychological evaluation. They're claiming you broke into the house last night in a state of emotional instability and threatened the security guard. That's insane. I didn't threaten anyone. I know. But they have the guard's report, and they're using it as evidence that you're dangerous and unstable. The hearing is this afternoon. You need to be there, and you need to be prepared for them to make you look as bad as possible. I hung up and looked at Nicole. She'd heard enough of the conversation to understand. We have 6 hours, she said. What do we need to do? I spread out the documents from the fireproof box. We need to build a case. Not just that I own the house legally, but that my mother is deliberately destroying Frank Coleman's legacy against his explicit wishes. We have his letter to the zoning board. We have this letter to me. We have the original deed and blueprints. We need more. We need witnesses. People who knew him, who knew what he wanted. People who can testify that he was sharp and clear-minded until the day he died. I started making a list. Dr. Patricia Wells, his physician for 20 years. Tom Hendricks, his neighbor and sailing partner. Margaret Foster from the Historical Society. Pastor John Williams, who delivered his eulogy. Each of these people had known Frank. Each could speak to his mental clarity, his intentions, his explicit wishes about the property. I called them all. Some didn't answer. Some hesitated, clearly uncomfortable getting involved in a family dispute. But 3 agreed to submit written statements before the hearing. Dr. Wells especially was adamant. Frank Coleman was one of the most mentally acute patients I ever treated. Right up until his stroke, we had conversations about history and politics that would put most college professors to shame. Any suggestion that he was confused or incompetent is absolutely false. By noon we had statements, documents, and photographs. I'd even found the guest book from the house, where visitors had signed in every summer for decades. Proof of how Frank had used the property. As a gathering place. As a community resource. Never as a business. Never as anything but a home he shared freely with anyone who needed it. The courthouse in Lake Geneva was a 19th century building, all white columns and old wood. The kind of place that still smelled like history and documents and the dusty weight of law. My mother sat in the front row with Derek and her attorney Richard Voss. She wore a cream suit and pearls, her hair perfect, her expression one of practiced sadness. The grieving daughter forced to take legal action against an unstable child. She didn't look at me once. The judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back severely. She read through the motion, then looked up. This is a request for an emergency injunction. Counselor, make your case. Richard Voss stood, smooth and confident. Your Honor, we're dealing with a tragic situation. A young woman unable to accept her grandfather's death. Unable to accept that estate assets must be properly managed. Last night, Miss Thompson broke into the property and threatened a security guard. We have the incident report here. This demonstrates a pattern of increasingly erratic behavior. James Brennan was on his feet immediately. Objection. Miss Thompson did not break in. She entered property she legally owns through a historical entrance. She threatened no one. The guard's report says she was cooperative and left when asked. Your Honor, this motion is a transparent attempt to deny my client access to her legal property, while the opposing party demolishes it. We have evidence that Mrs. Thompson is conducting commercial renovations without proper permits, in direct violation of the deceased's explicitly stated wishes. The judge held up a hand. Both of you sit. I'll review the evidence and hear testimony, but I want to be very clear. This is not a trial on the merits of the will contest. This is simply about whether an injunction is warranted pending resolution. Mrs. Thompson, you're first. My mother took the stand and I watched her transform. Her voice trembled. Her eyes welled with tears. She talked about her father's confusion in his final months. How he'd become fixated on Rebecca, pushing away his own daughter. How painful it was to watch him deteriorate. How she'd tried to help him but he'd refused. She's lying, I whispered to James. He squeezed my arm. I know. Just wait. Then Derek testified. He'd never even met my grandfather, but he spoke with absolute confidence about Linda's pain, her devotion, her concern for both her father's legacy and her daughter's mental health. It was a masterclass in manipulation, watching them construct this alternate reality where they were the victims and I was the threat. When it was my turn, I stood with my grandfather's letter in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just told the truth. My grandfather was the most important person in my life. He raised me every summer at that house. He taught me to sail, to fish, to see beauty in simple things. When he knew he was dying, he made sure to leave me the place that meant everything to both of us. Not to hurt my mother. Not to be cruel. But because he knew I would protect it. I would keep it as he built it. A home. A place of memory and love. My mother wants to turn it into a business. She's already started demolition without permits. She's destroying the interior that my grandfather built with his own hands. And she's doing it fast before anyone can stop her, because she knows that once it's gone, there's nothing left to fight for. I held up the letter. This is from my grandfather, written 2 months before his death, anticipating exactly what my mother would try to do. He was not confused. He was not incompetent. He was a man trying to protect what he built from someone he knew would destroy it. The judge took the letter, read it carefully. Then she looked at my mother. Mrs. Thompson, are you conducting commercial renovations on the property in question? My mother's attorney started to object, but the judge cut him off. It's a simple question. Answer it. My mother's composure cracked slightly. We're making improvements. Updating the property. That's not what I asked. Are you converting it to commercial use? A pause. Then we're considering our options. The property has significant potential. The judge set down the letter. I'm denying the injunction. Miss Rebecca Thompson has demonstrated sufficient ownership claim and legitimate concern about property damage. However, I'm also ordering that no further renovations occur until the will contest is resolved. Mrs. Thompson, if you continue construction, you'll be in contempt. This hearing is adjourned. My mother's face went white with fury. In the hallway outside, she cornered me, her voice low and venomous. You think you've won? This is just beginning. I will bury you in legal fees. I will drag this out for years. That house will sit empty and rotting before I let you have it. Maybe. But at least it won't be turned into your vanity project. At least what Grandpa built won't be destroyed. She stepped closer, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger. Fear. You don't understand what you're doing. There are things about that property about your grandfather that you don't know. Things that make this more complicated than your naive little crusade for justice. What things? She smiled, sharp and cold. You'll find out. And when you do, you'll wish you'd taken the settlement when I offered it. She walked away, heels clicking on the marble floor. And I stood there with my victory feeling suddenly hollow. What didn't I know? What was she hiding that made her this desperate? James appeared at my elbow. You did well in there. The judge clearly sees through their narrative. But this isn't over. We need to prepare for the actual will contest. And Rebecca, your mother's threat about dragging this out, she means it. Are you prepared for a long fight? I thought about my grandfather's letter. About his faith in me. About the house sitting empty across that cold lake, waiting. I'm prepared. Whatever it takes. We walked out into the November afternoon. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that promised snow. My phone buzzed with a text from Nicole. How did it go? I typed back. We stopped the demolition. But Mom's hiding something. Something she thinks will change everything. Her response came immediately. Then we find out what it is before she can use it. I stood on the courthouse steps, looking toward the lake though I couldn't see it from here. Somewhere out there, Coleman Cottage waited in the cold. My grandfather's life's work, frozen in time, caught between past and future. And somewhere in that house or in my mother's secrets, there was a truth that would decide everything. I just had to find it before she buried it forever. The first snow came that night, soft and silent, covering Lake Geneva in white that made everything look clean and new. But standing in my apartment, staring at the documents spread across every surface, I knew nothing about this situation was clean. My mother's words echoed in my mind like a warning bell. There are things about that property about your grandfather that you don't know. I'd spent the evening going through every paper in the fireproof box again, looking for whatever secret she thought would destroy my case. Birth certificates, property deeds, Navy discharge papers, letters between my grandparents written in the careful cursive of a different era. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested any dark truth that would overturn everything I believed. Nicole had gone home to Green Bay, promising to return on the weekend. James Brennan had called twice to remind me not to approach the property while the court order was pending. Everyone kept telling me to wait, to be patient, to let the legal process work. But patience had never been my strong suit, and my mother knew it. At midnight, my phone lit up with an email. No subject line. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, a random string of numbers and letters. Inside was a single sentence and an attachment. You should know what Frank Coleman really did with that house. The attachment was a scanned newspaper article from 1985, yellow with age, the ink faded but readable. The headline made my stomach drop. Local businessman questioned in development fraud investigation. I clicked the article larger, hands shaking. According to sources close to the investigation, Frank Coleman, owner of Coleman Construction, allegedly accepted payments to overlook building code violations in several residential developments around Lake Geneva. Properties built by Coleman's company between 1982 and 1984 have shown significant structural issues, including faulty foundations and substandard electrical work. Homeowners are demanding answers. I read it 3 times, each pass making me feel sicker. This couldn't be real. My grandfather was the most honest man I'd ever known. He taught me that integrity mattered more than profit, that doing things right was worth doing things slowly. But here was his name in print, connected to fraud and negligence. I searched for follow-up articles, anything that would tell me how this ended. Nothing. The investigation seemed to vanish from public record after that initial story. No charges filed. No resolution reported. Just this single article floating in time like an accusation without conclusion. The email address that sent it was untraceable. I tried calling the number associated with it, but got a disconnected message. Whoever sent this wanted me to see it but not to respond. Wanted me to doubt but not to investigate. Sleep was impossible. I made coffee and started searching digital newspaper archives, county records, anything that might tell me the full story. By 3 in the morning I'd found fragments. A lawsuit filed by homeowners against Coleman Construction in 1984. A settlement reached out of court in 1986. References to payments made, damages acknowledged, but no admission of wrongdoing. The kind of legal resolution that left everyone compromised but no one clearly guilty. At dawn, I called the one person who might tell me the truth. Tom Hendricks, my grandfather's oldest friend and sailing partner, was 83 now and lived in the same house he'd occupied for 60 years, 3 doors down from Coleman Cottage. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with sleep and age. "Rebecca, what time is it?" "I'm sorry, Tom. I know it's early, but I need to ask you something about Grandpa, about his construction business in the 80s. There was a long silence, then a sigh that seemed to carry decades of weight. "Your mother got to you. I figured she would eventually. So it's true? There was an investigation? Come over. This isn't a conversation for the phone." I drove up through the snow, watching the sun rise over the white-covered landscape, turning everything gold and silver. The lake was starting to freeze at the edges, ice forming in delicate patterns like lace. By the time I reached Tom's house, smoke was rising from his chimney, and he was waiting at the door with coffee already poured. We sat in his living room, surrounded by photographs of sailboats in summers past, and he told me the story my grandfather had never wanted me to know. "Frank ran a good business," Tom began. "Honest, careful, did everything by the book. But in the early 80s the economy around here went bad. Real bad. People stopped building. Contractors started going under. Frank had 20 employees depending on him, families who needed those paychecks. He was desperate to keep them working. That's when Victor Brennan approached him." "Victor Brennan? Any relation to James Brennan?" "His brother. Victor was a developer, the kind who cut corners to maximize profit. He offered Frank a deal. Big contract, multiple houses, enough work to keep the whole crew busy for 2 years. But there was a catch." Tom stared into his coffee cup like he could read the past there. "Victor wanted Frank to sign off on inspections without actually doing them properly. Wanted him to approve work that didn't meet code. Wanted him to be the reputable name that made the project look legitimate while Victor used cheap materials and unskilled labor. And Grandpa agreed? For about 6 months. Tom's voice was heavy with old sadness. He convinced himself it wasn't that bad, that the violations were minor, that he could fix the worst problems quietly. But it ate at him. I watched him lose weight, stop sleeping. Finally he couldn't take it anymore. He went to the county board himself, reported everything, testified against Victor even though it meant implicating himself. "The investigation you found, that was Frank turning himself in." I couldn't process it. My grandfather, the man who taught me about honor and integrity, had committed fraud, had endangered families, had compromised everything he claimed to believe in. Tom saw my face and leaned forward. "Listen to me, Rebecca. What your grandfather did was wrong. He knew it was wrong and he spent the rest of his life making it right. He paid for every repair out of his own pocket. He settled with every homeowner, gave them more than they asked for. He lost his business, his reputation, nearly lost his marriage. But he didn't run from it. He faced it head on and spent 30 years proving that one mistake didn't define him. Why didn't he ever tell me? Because he was ashamed. And because he didn't want you to think less of him. He loved you more than anything in this world, Becca. Wanted you to see the man he became, not the man he'd been in his darkest moment." I sat there, the coffee cold in my hands, trying to reconcile the grandfather I knew with this story. Everything felt unstable, like the ground beneath me was shifting. If he lied about this, what else did he lie about? He didn't lie. He just didn't tell you everything. There's a difference. And your mother, she knows this story. She's known it her whole life. It's why she's always resented him. She couldn't forgive him for being human, for making a mistake, for the embarrassment it caused her as a teenager when her friend's parents whispered about the Coleman scandal. So she's going to use it against me now. To make it seem like the house is tainted somehow. Like his legacy isn't worth protecting. Tom nodded slowly. That's exactly what she'll do. She'll paint him as a fraud. Suggest the house was built with dirty money. Imply that you're defending a criminal. And Rebecca, some of it will stick. People have long memories around here. I drove away from Tom's house feeling hollowed out and confused. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystal and perfect, but I barely saw it. My phone rang as I passed the turnoff to Coleman Cottage. James Brennan. His voice was tense. Rebecca, we have a problem. Victor Brennan is my brother, and he just filed an affidavit in your mother's will contest. He's claiming that the lake house was purchased with money from the fraudulent construction contracts, that it's proceeds of crime and therefore not legitimately part of Frank's estate. That's insane. The house was bought in 1972. The fraud happened in the 80s. I know. The timeline doesn't support his claim, but it muddies the water, and that's what they want. They're building a narrative where your grandfather was corrupt, where everything he built is questionable, where you're fighting to inherit tainted property. It's character assassination, and it's effective. Can we prove it's false? We can prove the timeline doesn't work. But Rebecca, there's something else. My brother is also claiming that Frank owed him money, substantial money from the settlement. He says the lake house should have been sold to pay that debt, that Frank concealed assets to avoid paying what he owed. Is it true? Did Grandpa owe him money? James was quiet for a moment. There was a settlement. Most of it was paid. But yes, there was a remaining balance when Frank died. Not enough to force a property sale, and the statute of limitations has passed. But it's enough to make your grandfather look like he was hiding assets. Enough to support your mother's narrative. I hung up and pulled over, my hands shaking too badly to drive. Everything was unraveling. The man I'd idolized, the legacy I was fighting for, all of it suddenly complicated and tarnished and unclear. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Now you understand. Take the settlement. Walk away. Let this house fade into history where it belongs. You don't want to fight a war where the only weapon is your grandfather's shame. It had to be my mother or someone working for her. I stared at the message, then deleted it. Then I sat in my car watching the lake and thinking about what Tom had said. Frank spent 30 years proving that one mistake didn't define him. I thought about the summers I'd spent here. The sailing lessons where he'd taught me patience and respect for the water's power. The evenings on the porch where he'd talked about history and responsibility, and the importance of facing your failures. The way he'd looked at me with such pride, such hope, such absolute belief that I could be better than he'd been. He'd never hidden who he was. He'd just shown me who he'd become. I called Nicole. Her answer was immediate, like she'd been waiting. I just got the weirdest email. Anonymous. Article about your grandfather and some fraud thing from the 80s. Did you get it too? Yeah. Along with a threatening text telling me to give up. She was quiet for a beat. Are you going to? I thought about it. Really thought about it. It would be easier to walk away. To take whatever settlement my mother offered. To let Coleman Cottage become whatever commercial venture she wanted. To preserve my memory of my grandfather without the complication of his mistakes. But then I remembered something he told me when I was 16, after I'd cheated on a history test and gotten caught. The easy thing is to pretend it didn't happen. The right thing is to face it, fix it, and do better. I'm not giving up. If anything, this makes me more determined. Because Grandpa made a mistake and spent his whole life making amends. My mother wants to use that mistake to destroy everything he built afterward. That's not justice. That's just cruelty. Good, Nicole said. Because I did some digging on Victor Brennan. You need to hear this. We met at a diner halfway between Milwaukee and Green Bay. One of those places that still had vinyl booths and served coffee in thick ceramic mugs. Nicole had her laptop open. Screen filled with public records and business filings. Victor Brennan is not a credible witness, she said. He's been sued 17 times in the last 20 years for construction fraud, breach of contract, and negligence. He's currently under investigation by the state for bid rigging on public contracts. And here's the interesting part. She turned the laptop toward me. 3 months ago, Derek Hutchinson hired Victor's company to do the renovation plans for Coleman Cottage. They're business partners now. The implication hit me like cold water. This isn't about debt. It's about my mother and Derek hiring Victor to attack Grandpa's reputation in exchange for the renovation contract. Exactly. They're using his old grudge against your grandfather to build their legal case. And they're paying him with work on the property. It's completely unethical, probably illegal, and definitely something we can use. I felt the first spark of hope in hours. Can you prove it? She grinned. Already did. Contracts signed, payments documented, the whole thing. James is going to love this. But there's more. She pulled up another document. I also found the original investigation report from 1985. The one that cleared your grandfather. What? He was cleared? Not exactly cleared, but not charged either. The investigator concluded that Frank was negligent but not criminal. That he'd been manipulated by Victor, reported it himself when he realized the extent of the violations, and cooperated fully with remediation. The report specifically notes his unusual level of honesty and accountability. It recommends no criminal charges. Why isn't this in the public record? Because Victor Brennan had it sealed as part of the settlement. He didn't want people knowing that Frank had turned him in. Didn't want the full extent of his own fraud documented. So the only thing available publicly is that first article, the one that makes it look like an ongoing investigation. But the actual resolution? Hidden for 40 years. Until now. I could have cried with relief. This changed everything. Not just the legal case, but my understanding of what my grandfather had done. He hadn't just made a mistake and moved on. He'd actively corrected it at great personal cost, and then been denied credit for that correction because the man who'd manipulated him in the first place wanted to hide his own crimes. We have to get this to James immediately. Already sent it. He's filing a motion to introduce it as evidence and to have Victor's affidavit thrown out as biased and fraudulent. But Rebecca, there's something else you need to see. She pulled up a property record, dated 1987. 2 years after the investigation, someone tried to buy Coleman Cottage from your grandfather. Offered him way over market value. Guess who? I didn't need to guess. The name on the offer was clear. Victor Brennan. He wanted the house. Grandpa said no, obviously. But why would Victor want it? Nicole scrolled to another document, this one a zoning proposal from 1988. Victor wanted to turn this whole area into a resort development. Luxury condos, marina, the works. He needed Coleman Cottage because it's the centerpiece property. The best water access, the most land, the historical significance. Without it, his development plan didn't work. So when Frank refused to sell, Victor's whole project collapsed. And he's been angry about it ever since. Angry enough that when your mother came to him with this will contest, he saw his chance for revenge. And for profit, because if they discredit your grandfather and break the will, your mother will sell to Derek, Derek will develop it with Victor, and Victor finally gets what he wanted 40 years ago. It was diabolical in its completeness. They weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were finishing a vendetta that had started before I was born. I sat back in the booth, mind racing. We need more. We need to prove they're coordinating. That this isn't separate legal actions but a conspiracy. Way ahead of you. Nicole pulled up email records. Derek is dumb enough to use his personal email for business. And he's been corresponding with Victor for 6 months. Since before Frank died. My blood went cold. Before? She nodded grimly. They were planning this while your grandfather was still alive. Discussing how to challenge the will, how to discredit Frank, how to position your mother as the rightful heir. Derek even mentions waiting for the old man to die so they can move forward. It's all here. Premeditation, conspiracy, everything. This wasn't grief or hurt feelings or even greed. This was calculated destruction. My mother had been planning to steal my inheritance while my grandfather was still breathing. While I'd been sitting with him on the dock, holding his hand, listening to his stories, she'd been plotting with her boyfriend and his criminal partner to take everything he wanted to give me. I felt sick. Felt betrayed in a way that went beyond property or money. This was family. This was supposed to mean something. How did you get Derek's emails? Nicole smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. I didn't. But Derek's sister Vanessa, the real estate agent? She's been sleeping with her business partner for 3 years. Her business partner happens to be Derek's ex-wife. And Derek's ex-wife really doesn't like how Derek treated her in their divorce. So when I explained what was happening, what Derek was doing to you, she was more than happy to share everything she had access to. The enemy of my enemy, I said, is extremely helpful. So what do we do with all this? We bury them. We take every piece of evidence to James, we file for sanctions against Victor for perjury, we expose the coordination between your mother and Derek and Victor, and we make it so ugly in public that no judge will side with them. But Rebecca, you need to be prepared. This is going to destroy your relationship with your mother permanently. There won't be any coming back from this. I thought about the woman who'd raised me, who'd been distant and critical but still my mother. The woman who'd missed my school plays because of work but had paid for my college. The woman who'd never quite known how to love me but had, in her own way, tried. Then I thought about her planning this betrayal while my grandfather was dying, coordinating with criminals to steal what he'd wanted me to have, using his greatest shame as a weapon against his final wishes. That relationship is already destroyed. She destroyed it when she chose property over her own daughter, when she decided her revenge mattered more than his legacy. I'm just accepting what she already made true. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Nicole would organize all the digital evidence. I would work with James on the legal filings. We'd contact the local newspaper, the Historical Society, anyone who might care that Coleman Cottage was being stolen through fraud and manipulation. We'd make this public, messy, impossible to ignore. By the time we left the diner, the sun was setting, painting the snow orange and pink. My phone rang. Tom Hendricks. His voice was shaking. Rebecca, you need to get to the lake house. Now. There's smoke. What? Smoke. Coming from Coleman Cottage. I called the fire department, but you need to get here. I hung up and ran for my car, Nicole right behind me. We drove too fast through the darkening evening, my heart hammering, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. We smelled it before we saw it. Smoke thick and acrid drifting across the frozen lake. Fire trucks were already there when we arrived, their lights painting the snow in red and blue. Firefighters moved with controlled urgency, hoses trained on the cottage. But it wasn't a full fire. It was contained, controlled, deliberately set in a way that would cause damage but not total destruction. I jumped out of the car and ran toward the house, but a firefighter stopped me. You can't go in there, ma'am. It's not safe. I own that house. That's my property. He looked at his clipboard. Are you Rebecca Thompson? Yes. He handed me a piece of paper. This was taped to the door when we arrived. Someone wanted you to see it. The note was typed anonymous. Last warning. Drop the case or lose everything. The fire is just the beginning. My hand shook as I read it. They tried to burn my grandfather's house. Had set fire to the only physical connection I had left to him. Had threatened to destroy everything if I didn't surrender. The fire chief approached, pulling off his helmet. Good news is, the damage is mostly contained to the kitchen and back hallway. Bad news is, it was definitely arson. Gasoline accelerant. Crude but effective. You report any threats lately? I showed him the note. He photographed it, then handed it to a police officer who just arrived. This is now a criminal investigation. We'll need statements from everyone. Did anyone see anything? A voice called out from behind us. I did. Tom Hendricks stepped forward, his old face angry in the firelight. I was watching. I've been watching since the hearing because I didn't trust Linda. And about 2 hours ago, a man came to the house. He had keys. Went inside for about 10 minutes, came out carrying something, then drove away. I got his license plate. He held up his phone showing a clear photograph of a black truck, license plate visible, and a man's profile. The police officer took the phone. Can you identify this person? Tom looked at me, then back at the officer. That's Derek Hutchinson, Rebecca's mother's boyfriend, the one who wants to develop this property. He set the fire himself. The officer's expression hardened. We'll bring him in for questioning. In the meantime, this is a crime scene. Nobody enters until we've processed it. I stood there watching firefighters pour water on my grandfather's house, watching smoke rise into the winter sky, and I felt something shift inside me. Fear transformed into fury. Grief hardened into resolve. They'd made their move. They'd shown me exactly how far they were willing to go. And they'd given me proof of criminal conspiracy, arson, intimidation. Everything I needed to not just win the legal case but to destroy them completely. Nicole touched my arm. You okay? I watched the smoke spiral upward, disappearing into the darkness above. I'm done being careful. I'm done playing by rules they're not following. Tomorrow we take everything we have and we burn their world down. She smiled. Now you sound like Frank Coleman's granddaughter. We drove back to Milwaukee in silence, the smell of smoke clinging to our clothes. Behind us, Coleman Cottage stood damaged but not destroyed, waiting in the frozen darkness. My grandfather had built that house to last. Had constructed it to withstand storms and time and the weight of years. It would take more than one man with a gas can to erase what he'd created. And it would take more than my mother's greed and Victor's revenge and Derek's criminality to make me surrender what was rightfully mine. The war had just begun. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They'd assumed I would be afraid. Instead, I was finally completely ready to fight. The morning after the fire, I woke to my phone vibrating with notifications. News of the arson had spread through Lake Geneva like wildfire, the irony not lost on anyone. Local reporters were calling. Neighbors were texting. The Historical Society had issued a statement condemning the attack on a landmark property. And my mother had posted on social media a carefully crafted message expressing shock and concern, painting herself as a worried parent devastated by the violence targeting her family's estate. The performance was masterful. She'd managed to position herself as a victim while her boyfriend was being questioned by police for the very crime she was lamenting. I screenshotted the post before she could delete it, adding it to the growing mountain of evidence that would bury her. James Brennan called at 7 in the morning, his voice electric with energy I hadn't heard before. Rebecca, Derek Hutchinson was arrested an hour ago. They found gas receipts in his truck matching the accelerant used in the fire. His phone records show he was at the property exactly when Tom said. And here's the beautiful part, he's already trying to cut a deal, saying he was following orders, that he didn't want to do it but felt pressured. Pressured by who? He won't say yet. But we both know. His lawyer is trying to negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony. If he flips on your mother and Victor, this whole conspiracy collapses. How long before we know? Days, maybe hours. Derek's not a hardened criminal. He's a failed entrepreneur who got in over his head with people more ruthless than he understood. My guess is he talks before the weekend. I hung up and looked at Nicole, who'd stayed over on my couch. She was already awake, laptop open, scanning news coverage. This is going viral, she said. Local news picked it up. Now it's getting shared on regional sites. Historical preservation groups are getting involved. There's even a petition started to protect Coleman Cottage as a cultural landmark. How many signatures? As of right now, 4,000 and climbing. The narrative was shifting. What my mother had tried to frame as a family dispute over inheritance was becoming a public story about greed, corruption, and the destruction of community heritage. People who'd never met my grandfather were signing petitions to protect his house. Strangers were sharing memories of driving past the cottage, of the community events he'd hosted there, of the way the place had been a landmark for generations. Frank Coleman was becoming a symbol, and my mother was becoming the villain trying to erase him. My phone rang again. Tom Hendricks. His voice was urgent. Rebecca, you need to see something. I'm at my house. Come now. We drove through morning light that made the snow glitter like diamonds. The lake was more frozen now, ice spreading from the shores toward the center, the water slowly disappearing beneath winter's grip. Tom's house smelled like coffee and old books. He led us to his dining room table where he'd spread out photographs, dozens of them spanning decades. These are from the summers your grandfather hosted the community regatta, he said. Every year from 1975 to 2015. Look at who's in them. I looked. My grandfather, younger in the early photos, aging gradually through the years. Children learning to sail. Families picnicking on his lawn. The mayor presenting him with a community service award. Local veterans gathering for 4th of July celebrations. And in several photos from the late 90s and early 2000s, teenage versions of people I recognized. Nicole's parents. The current fire chief. The woman who owned the bookstore downtown. Even Judge Morrison, who would likely preside over the will contest, as a young lawyer with his family. These people all have memories of Coleman Cottage, Tom said. Of what your grandfather built there. Not just a house but a gathering place. A center for community. That's why the petition is growing so fast. People remember. Can we use this? In court? Some of it. But more importantly, you can use it in the court of public opinion. Your mother is trying to make this about family drama and legal technicalities. You need to make it about what it really is. The destruction of something that belongs to everyone who ever experienced it. We spent the morning scanning photographs and collecting statements. Tom called old friends, People who'd attended events at the cottage, whose children had learned to sail from Frank's patient instruction. One by one, they agreed to speak publicly about what Coleman Cottage had meant to the community. By noon we had 20 statements. By evening we had 50. People remembered. They cared. And they were angry that someone was trying to turn a beloved landmark into a commercial venture. The local newspaper called requesting an interview. I agreed immediately, over James's cautious objections. We met at a cafe in town. The reporter, a woman in her 40s named Susan Chan, who'd grown up in Lake Geneva. She remembered my grandfather. Started the interview by telling me how he'd helped her family when their house flooded in 1993, offering them the cottage guest room for 2 weeks while repairs were made. He didn't know us well, she said, but he knew we needed help, and that was enough for him. That's who people need to understand he was. Not the man from one mistake 40 years ago, but the man he became after. The man who spent his whole life giving back. Tell me about the fire. I told her everything. The threatening note, Tom's eyewitness account, Derek's arrest. The coordination between my mother, Derek, and Victor Brennan. The emails planning the will contest before my grandfather died. The conspiracy to use his past mistakes as weapons against his final wishes. She took notes rapidly, eyes widening at certain revelations. This is bigger than a family dispute, she said. This is fraud, arson, conspiracy. Why isn't this getting more police attention? It is now. But my mother has connections, money, expensive lawyers. They've been able to keep things quiet, frame it as civil matters rather than criminal. That changes with Derek's arrest. And it changes when people understand what's really at stake. The article ran the next morning, front page, with the headline Beloved Lake Geneva Landmark Under Siege. It laid out the entire story in detail. My grandfather's legacy. The will leaving the cottage to me. My mother's contested claim. The revelation about Victor Brennan's 40-year grudge, and his business relationship with Derek. The emails proving premeditation. And the arson, the final, desperate act of people who knew they were losing. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The newspaper's website crashed from traffic. Local television stations called requesting interviews. National preservation organizations reached out offering support. And most importantly, witnesses started coming forward. People who'd been approached by Victor Brennan over the years, offered money to testify against Frank Coleman's character. People who'd seen Derek at the cottage on other occasions, acting suspicious. A former employee of my mother's who'd overheard conversations about the plan to challenge the will. Each new witness strengthened the case. Each new revelation made my mother's position more untenable. And through it all, Derek remained in custody, his lawyer frantically negotiating while the evidence against him mounted. On the third day after the fire, James called with news. Derek flipped. He's giving a full statement implicating your mother and Victor Brennan in conspiracy to commit fraud and extortion. Says your mother promised him ownership stake in the developed property if he helped discredit you and your grandfather. Says Victor provided the strategy, using the old fraud case to attack Frank's credibility. And he admits to setting the fire under your mother's direction. She told him to do it? His exact words are that she said, "Make the place worthless if we can't have it valuable." She wanted the house damaged enough that you'd give up fighting for it. That's conspiracy to commit arson. Criminal charges, not just civil. The district attorney is reviewing the case now. Could be charges filed by end of week. I sat down hard, legs suddenly shaky. After months of fighting, of feeling like I was battling shadows and lies, finally there was concrete proof. Finally, the truth was undeniable. But you need to prepare yourself, James continued. Your mother will be arrested. This will be public, messy, painful. Family members will take sides. People will judge. Are you ready for that? I thought about my grandfather's letter. About his courage in facing his own mistakes publicly, accepting consequences, spending decades making amends. If he could do that, I could face the consequences of exposing the truth. I'm ready. Do what needs to be done. The arrest happened on a Friday morning. I wasn't there, but Nicole was. She'd positioned herself outside my mother's Chicago condo with her phone camera, along with 3 news crews who'd gotten the same tip. When the police arrived, my mother emerged with her lawyer, dressed impeccably as always, her face a mask of outraged dignity. She said nothing to the cameras, But her eyes found Nicole in the crowd. The look she gave was pure venom, a promise of retribution that would have terrified me months ago. Now it just made me sad. Victor Brennan was arrested the same day at his office, let out in handcuffs while his employees watched. His lawyer immediately began attacking Derek's credibility, calling him a liar trying to save himself. But the emails existed. The documented payments existed. The 40-year pattern of grudge and revenge existed. Victor's guilt was written in decades of evidence he'd thought was buried. The weekend was chaos. My phone never stopped ringing. Reporters, lawyers, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanting to share their opinions. My mother's friends called to yell at me for destroying her life. My grandfather's old friends called to thank me for defending his legacy. The Historical Society announced they were filing to have Coleman Cottage designated as a protected landmark, preventing any commercial development regardless of ownership. And through it all, the cottage sat empty and damaged, waiting. On Monday morning, James called with the words I'd been waiting to hear. The district attorney filed formal charges. Your mother faces conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit arson. Victor faces fraud and racketeering based on his broader pattern of behavior. Derek's testifying in exchange for reduced charges. And the judge in the will contest has ordered an immediate hearing on the matter. Emergency session tomorrow morning. This could end it. I barely slept that night. Nicole stayed over again, both of us too wired to rest. We sat up watching the snow fall outside my window, turning Milwaukee into a wonderland that felt surreal given the ugliness of what was happening. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? Nicole asked quietly. I don't know. Part of me wants to. She's still my mother. But she tried to destroy everything Grandpa built. Tried to burn down my inheritance. How do you forgive that? Maybe you don't forgive it. Maybe you just accept that people are capable of terrible things when they want something badly enough. And maybe you decide that protecting what matters is more important than preserving relationships with people who try to destroy it. The courthouse the next morning was packed. News crews lined the steps. Protesters held signs supporting historical preservation. Inside, the gallery was full of faces I recognized. Tom Hendricks in the front row. Nicole beside me. James with his briefcase full of irrefutable evidence. And my mother, seated with her lawyer, refusing to look in my direction. She'd made bail, but the conditions were strict. No contact with me, no approach to the property, GPS monitoring to ensure compliance. She sat rigid in her designer suit, a woman watching her carefully constructed world collapse around her. Judge Morrison entered and the room fell silent. She was a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair, and an expression that suggested she suffered fools poorly. She'd reviewed all the new evidence over the weekend. Now she looked at both sides with equal severity. This case has become considerably more complicated since I last addressed it, she began. We're no longer simply discussing the validity of a will. We're discussing criminal conspiracy, fraud, and destruction of property. Mrs. Thompson, your attorney has filed a motion to continue the civil case pending resolution of criminal charges. I'm denying that motion. Given the severity of the charges and the strength of the evidence presented, I'm making a ruling today on the will contest itself. My mother's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client hasn't been convicted of anything. She's entitled to due process. She's entitled to due process in the criminal case. But this is a civil matter, and the evidence of her intentions and actions is clear enough for me to make a determination. She shuffled papers, then looked directly at my mother. Mrs. Thompson, I've reviewed the original will, your contest filing, and all subsequent evidence. I've read your father's letters, both the one to the zoning board and the one to his granddaughter. I've reviewed the testimony of his physician, his lawyer, and multiple community members attesting to his mental clarity. I've seen the emails planning to contest the will before he died. I've examined the business arrangements with Victor Brennan and the evidence of coordination to discredit Frank Coleman's character. And I've considered the arson, the threats, and the pattern of behavior designed to intimidate your daughter into surrendering her legal inheritance. She paused, and the silence was absolute. Based on all of this, I find that Frank Coleman's will was valid, properly executed, and reflects his clear and unequivocal intentions. The contest is dismissed. Rebecca Thompson is the sole legal owner of Coleman Cottage and all associated property and assets. Furthermore, I'm issuing a permanent restraining order preventing Linda Thompson, Derek Hutchinson, and Victor Brennan from approaching or contacting Rebecca Thompson or the property. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. The gavel struck, and the sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Months of fighting, of fear and doubt and exhaustion, and it was over. I'd won. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping loud in the silence. She turned to face me for the first time, and her expression was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not even hatred. Devastation. Complete and utter loss. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She'd gambled everything on greed and revenge, and lost not just the property but her freedom, her reputation, her relationship with her only child. Then I remembered the fire. Remembered her planning this while my grandfather was dying. Remembered every lie and manipulation and threat. The pity evaporated. She'd made her choices. Now she lived with the consequences. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I made a brief statement, carefully worded, thanking the court and the community and promising to preserve Coleman Cottage as my grandfather intended, as a place of memory and gathering, never as a commercial venture. That night, I drove to Lake Geneva alone. The cottage stood dark against the frozen lake, yellow caution tape still marking it as a crime scene. But the structure was sound. The fire had damaged rooms that could be repaired. The bones of what my grandfather built remained strong. I walked down to the dock, ice crunching under my feet. The lake stretched before me, mostly frozen now, moonlight turning the ice silver. This was the view my grandfather had loved. The peace he'd wanted to preserve. The legacy he'd entrusted to me. Standing there in the cold, I felt his presence. Not as something supernatural or mystical, but as memory made solid. Every board he'd nailed, every tree he'd planted, every summer evening he'd sat here watching the sun set. All of it was still here. All of it had survived. My phone buzzed with a text from Nicole. The petition hit 10,000 signatures. Historical Society is planning a spring celebration at the cottage once repairs are done. Community wants to honor Frank's memory. You okay? I typed back. I'm home. Over the next 3 months, I threw myself into restoration. The insurance money covered the fire damage. Volunteers from the community showed up weekends to help repair and paint. Tom Hendricks supervised, making sure every detail matched Frank's original vision. We found things during the work. Letters tucked behind baseboards. Photographs hidden in ceiling joists. A bottle of champagne my grandfather had hidden with a note reading, "Open this when the battle's over." We opened it on the first warm day of spring, when the ice finally broke on the lake. The sound was like thunder, great cracks spreading across the frozen surface as water pushed through. Winter releasing its grip. Everything beginning again. Derek pleaded guilty to arson and conspiracy, received 3 years with possibility of parole. Victor Brennan fought the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. His trial was set for fall, and prosecutors were confident. My mother's case was more complex. Her lawyer was fighting hard, trying to separate her from the more serious charges. But the emails existed. Derek's testimony existed. She directed the destruction of property, threatened me, conspired to defraud. Even with the best legal defense money could buy, the outcome looked grim. Part of me hoped she'd reach out, apologize, explain what had driven her to such extremes. But she never did. The only communication came through lawyers, cold and formal, discussing the criminal case and nothing more. The mother I'd known, distant but still my mother, was gone. In her place was a stranger who'd chosen property over family, and now faced the consequences alone. In May, the cottage reopened. We held a community celebration, just as my grandfather had done for decades. Sailboats on the water. Children learning to rig lines under Tom's patient instruction. Tables of food on the lawn. The mayor gave a speech about Frank Coleman's legacy and the importance of preserving community spaces. The Historical Society presented me with a plaque designating the cottage as a landmark. And as the sun set over Silver Bay, painting the water gold and pink, I stood on the porch where my grandfather had stood 1,000 times before. Nicole appeared beside me with 2 glasses of lemonade, my grandfather's recipe. To Frank Coleman, she said, raising her glass. Who taught you to fight for what matters? To Grandpa, I echoed. Who knew exactly what would happen and trusted me to handle it. We drank and watched the celebration below. Strangers and friends, old and young, all gathered in a place that had survived attempts to destroy it. My phone buzzed. James Brennan. Thought you'd want to know. Your mother's lawyer just informed me she's pleading guilty to reduced charges. Conspiracy to commit fraud. No jail time but substantial fines and probation. She'll avoid trial, but her reputation is finished. I read the message twice, waiting for some emotion. Relief maybe. Or vindication. But all I felt was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of anger. Ready to move forward into whatever came next. Tom found me as the party wound down. Guests heading to their cars. The lawn littered with the pleasant debris of celebration. Your grandfather would be proud, he said. Not just that you won. That you fought the right way. Faced the truth, even the hard parts, and came through it still believing in what he built. I hope so. I think about him every day. Wonder what he'd say about all of this. Tom smiled. He'd say the same thing he always said. The lake remembers everything. The land keeps score. And in the end, truth has more staying power than lies. He patted my shoulder and headed toward his car, moving slowly but steady. A man who'd seen decades of seasons change and knew that spring always followed winter given time. That night, I stayed at the cottage for the first time since becoming its official owner. I'd been avoiding it, telling myself I was waiting for repairs to finish. But really I'd been afraid. Afraid it would feel different now. Afraid my grandfather's presence would be gone, replaced by the memory of fire and legal battles and family betrayal. I need not have worried. The moment I walked through the door, I felt him. In the creak of the floorboards he'd installed. In the view from the kitchen window he'd positioned specifically to catch the sunrise. In the way the house settled at night, familiar sounds like breathing. I made coffee the way he'd taught me, strong and dark, and sat on the porch in his old chair. The lake stretched before me, finally free of ice, reflecting stars like scattered diamonds. Everything was still. Everything was possible. My phone lit up one last time before I went to bed. An email from an address I didn't recognize, subject line simply, "Thank you." Inside was a message from someone I'd never met. A woman named Jennifer Carter. She explained that she'd grown up in one of the houses Frank had built during the 80s, one of the ones with structural problems from Victor's fraud. When the issues were discovered, her parents had been devastated, unable to afford the repairs. Frank Coleman had shown up at their door, she wrote, and insisted on fixing everything at his own expense. He spent weekends for an entire summer making their house safe and sound. My parents never forgot that. Never forgot the man who made a mistake and then spent years correcting it. When I saw what was happening with the cottage, I had to speak up. I had to let people know who Frank Coleman really was. The man who saved my childhood home. The man who taught me that integrity means doing the right thing even when it costs you everything. I read the email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This was why I'd fought. Not for property or money or winning. For this. For the truth about a man who'd spent his life proving that people could change, could grow, could be better than their worst moments. For the legacy that mattered more than any building or land deed. For the memory of love that had raised me and shaped me, and made me believe that fighting for what's right was always worth the cost. I typed a response. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for remembering him. Thank you for understanding why this mattered. The lake is free now. The house is safe. And every person who gathers here, who makes memories here, who finds peace here, is part of his legacy. He would be so grateful to know his mistakes didn't define him. That in the end, people remembered what he became, not what he'd been. As spring turned to summer, I settled into a rhythm. Working during the week in Milwaukee, spending weekends at the cottage. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Nicole or Tom or other friends who'd helped me through the battle. I started hosting community events again, continuing what my grandfather had begun. Sailing lessons for kids. Historical society meetings. Evening gatherings where people shared stories of the lake's past. The cottage became what it had always meant to be. A place that belonged to everyone who loved it. My mother I saw only once more. A brief encounter at a distance in downtown Chicago. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. Our eyes met across the crowded street. For a moment I thought she might approach, might finally say something. But she just turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I didn't chase her. Didn't call out. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. Some relationships end not with forgiveness but with acceptance that they're over. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. We'd both have to live with the consequences. On a perfect July evening, I sat on the dock with my feet dangling over the water, watching the sun set in brilliant orange and gold. Sailboats drifted past, their white sails catching the last light. Laughter echoed from the shore where children played. The cottage behind me glowed warm and welcoming, exactly as my grandfather had designed it to be. This was home. This was legacy. This was what I'd fought for and won. Not just property or vindication, but the preservation of love made physical. A place where memory lived in wood and stone and the gentle lap of water against the dock. My phone buzzed with a message from James. Final legal costs are in. After everything, settlements and fees, you're going to come out slightly ahead. Frank's estate was larger than we thought. He'd been saving, planning, making sure you'd be taken care of. Always thinking ahead, that man. I smiled and put the phone away. Of course he'd planned for this. Of course he'd known I might face exactly what I'd faced. And of course he'd made sure I'd have what I needed to win. That was Frank Coleman. The man who made one terrible mistake and spent the rest of his life ensuring nobody else paid for it. The man who built this cottage as a sanctuary and protected it even from beyond the grave. The man who loved me enough to trust me with his greatest treasure. As darkness settled and the stars emerged, I made a promise to him and to the lake and to myself. This place would endure. Would continue to be what he'd intended. Would stand as proof that love and integrity and stubborn determination could overcome greed and betrayal, and the worst impulses of human nature. Coleman Cottage would remain. And in remaining it would remember. The lake would remember. The land would keep score. And in the end, as my grandfather had always believed, the truth would have the final word. I stood up from the dock and walked back toward the house, its windows glowing golden in the darkness. Behind me the lake whispered against the shore. An ancient sound that had witnessed everything and would witness everything still to come. Inside, I brewed tea and settled into my grandfather's chair by the fireplace. Around me the house creaked and settled, familiar as breathing. This was home. This was victory. This was the beginning of something my grandfather had started and I would carry forward. At my mother's trial for my inheritance, she stood in court with lies and lawyers. But what she didn't count on was the truth. The documents. The witnesses. The community that remembered what Frank Coleman really was. She tried to bury his legacy. Instead, she buried herself. The cottage still stands on Silver Bay, exactly as he built it. A place of memory and gathering. A place where justice was served not just by law, but by the land itself refusing to let lies take root. My name is Rebecca Thompson. And the lake house my mother tried to steal? It's mine. It was always mine. And now it always will be. The autumn after the trial brought changes I hadn't expected. The cottage had become something larger than just my inheritance. It had become a story people told. A symbol of standing up to corruption, of fighting for what mattered even when the odds seemed impossible. Newspapers ran follow-up articles. A documentary filmmaker from Madison reached out wanting to tell the full story. The Wisconsin Historical Society asked to archive my grandfather's papers and the documents from the legal battle as part of their collection on community preservation. I said yes to the archive but no to the documentary. Some stories needed time before they could be told properly, and I was still living inside this one, still processing what it meant to have fought my own mother in court and won. Still trying to understand how love and family and inheritance could become so twisted that someone would burn down a house rather than let it go to the person it was meant for. The cottage itself had been fully restored by September. Every room repaired, every surface cleaned of smoke damage, every detail returned to how my grandfather had designed it. But I'd made one significant change. In the kitchen, where the fire had done the worst damage, I'd installed a new wall of windows overlooking the lake. Where there had been solid wall and cabinets, now there was glass and light and an unobstructed view of the water. Tom had questioned it at first, suggesting I keep everything exactly as Frank had built it. But I'd explained that my grandfather had always believed in letting places evolve, in making them work for the people who lived in them. He wouldn't want me to turn this into a museum. He'd want me to make it mine while honoring what he'd created. The windows stayed, and Tom admitted they were perfect when we sat drinking coffee there one morning, watching the sun rise over water that looked like liquid gold. The legal aftermath continued to unfold slowly, like watching a complicated knot untangle strand by strand. Derek Hutchinson served 8 months before being released on parole. I heard through James that he'd moved to Minnesota, started working construction for someone else, stayed completely out of trouble. Whatever darkness had driven him to set that fire seemed to have burned out of him during his brief incarceration. Victor Brennan fought his case all the way to trial. The proceedings lasted 3 weeks, and I attended every day. Watching him try to justify 40 years of fraud and manipulation was educational in the worst way. His defense was that everyone cut corners, that Frank Coleman had been just as guilty, that the whole construction industry operated on handshake deals and looking the other way. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before convicting him on 17 counts. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to dozens of victims spanning 4 decades. When the verdict was read, he looked directly at me across the courtroom. His expression wasn't angry or defiant. It was resigned, like he'd always known this moment would come eventually. Justice delayed, Tom said as we left the courthouse that day, but not denied. My mother's situation remained the most complicated. She'd pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and received 5 years probation, substantial fines, and a permanent criminal record that destroyed her career in real estate development. No jail time, but her life as she'd known it was finished. Her expensive Chicago condo went on the market to pay legal fees and restitution. Her social circle evaporated as friends distanced themselves from the scandal. The women's wellness retreats she'd planned with Derek never materialized. Everything she'd schemed for, everything she'd been willing to destroy our relationship to obtain, had slipped through her fingers like water. I didn't feel triumphant about it. Watching your mother's life collapse is painful even when she brought it on herself, even when she tried to destroy what you loved most. There's no victory in that kind of loss, only sadness for what could have been if she'd chosen differently. She reached out once during this period, not to me directly but through James. She wanted to discuss the possibility of visiting the cottage one last time, to collect some personal items she claimed Frank had been keeping for her. James advised against it, said it was likely a manipulation, a way to create grounds for some new legal action. But something in me couldn't refuse. She was still my mother. And maybe after everything, she deserved a chance to say goodbye to her father's house properly. We arranged it for a Tuesday afternoon in October when the trees around the lake were burning with color. I arrived early and walked through the house, making sure there was nothing she could claim to take that wasn't legitimately hers. Then I waited on the porch watching the road, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. She arrived in a rental car. Not the Mercedes she'd driven months ago. She looked older, her hair different, her clothes simpler. The armor of wealth and status had been stripped away, leaving someone more vulnerable and real than I'd seen in years. We stood facing each other across the porch, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she finally said. Her voice was different too, quieter, without the edge of command I was used to. "I didn't think you would. I wasn't sure I would either. What did you want to collect?" She looked past me at the house. "That's what I told your lawyer. But honestly, there's nothing in there I need. I just wanted to see it one more time. Wanted to understand what I was willing to destroy for something I didn't even really want." We sat in the rocking chairs my grandfather had made, the same chairs where he'd spent countless evenings. The lake spread before us, peaceful under the autumn sun. A pair of loons called to each other across the water, their cries haunting and beautiful. "Your grandfather loved this place more than anything," she said eventually. "More than me, certainly. I used to resent that so much. Resent that he could find peace here while I was always restless, always wanting more. I didn't understand until I'd lost everything that maybe peace was the point. Maybe this was enough and I was just too blind to see it." I watched a sailboat tack across the bay, its white sail bright against the blue water. "He didn't love this place more than you, Mom. He loved what it represented. Community, simplicity, connection. He wanted you to love those things too. But you wanted different things and he couldn't make you want what he wanted." She was quiet for a while. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I know you'll never forgive me. I know I destroyed whatever relationship we had. But I need you to understand it wasn't about the money or the property. It was about feeling like I mattered. Like I was his daughter, not just the disappointing one who never measured up to his perfect granddaughter. You were never perfect, I said. And he never thought you were disappointing. You just thought that because you measured yourself against some impossible standard. He loved you, Mom. He left you plenty in his will. He just knew the cottage needed someone who would protect it, and that was me. Not because I was better, but because I wanted to. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I know that now. I just wish I'd known it before I became a person who would try to burn down her own father's house to hurt her own daughter. We're quite a family, aren't we? We sat in silence as the afternoon stretched toward evening. Eventually she stood, smoothing her pants, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad you won. I'm glad the cottage is safe. I'm glad Frank's legacy is protected. I don't know if I'll ever be able to make things right with you, but at least I didn't succeed in destroying what he built. That's something, I suppose. It's more than something. I stood too, facing her across the porch. It's choosing to be glad about the right outcome, even when it's not the one you wanted. That's growth, Mom. Maybe there's hope for you yet. She smiled sadly. Maybe. Though I think that hope looks like accepting I won't be part of your life anymore. That I forfeited that right. But I can still hope you're happy. That you built something beautiful here. That you become the person Frank believed you could be. She walked to her car without looking back. I watched her drive away, taillights disappearing down the tree-lined road, and felt a chapter close. Not with reconciliation or forgiveness exactly, but with understanding. She'd made terrible choices. I defended what mattered. We'd both have to live with those truths. Winter came early that year, the lake freezing solid by Thanksgiving. I spent Christmas at the cottage with Nicole and Tom and a dozen other friends who'd become family during the fight. We cooked dinner in my grandfather's kitchen, the new windows revealing falling snow that turned the world into a snow globe. Someone found the old record player and put on big band music Frank had loved. We danced in the living room, laughing and ridiculous, creating new memories in a space built on old ones. This is what he wanted, Tom said at one point, watching everyone gathered around the fireplace. Not a museum to his memory, but a living place. People loving it, using it, filling it with joy. You've done that, Becca. You've honored him better than any preserved monument ever could. As the new year arrived, I made a decision that had been forming for months. I would live at the cottage full time. My apartment in Milwaukee had served its purpose, but it had never been home. Not the way this place was. I could work remotely, design architecture projects from the room my grandfather had used as his office. I could be the caretaker the property needed, hosting events and maintaining the grounds and keeping the community connection alive. I could build a life here that honored his legacy while being completely my own. The transition took weeks of packing and planning and saying goodbye to the city life I'd known. But when I finally moved the last box into the cottage on a cold January morning, I felt something settle inside me. This was right. This was home. This was where I was meant to be. Spring brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. The roof needed replacing. The dock had to be rebuilt. The old boathouse was showing its age in ways that required serious structural work. Every problem felt overwhelming until I remembered I didn't have to face them alone. I put out calls for help, and the community responded. Contractors who'd known my grandfather offered reduced rates. Friends volunteered weekends. The Historical Society helped secure grants for preservation work. Tom supervised everything with the meticulous attention he'd learned from Frank himself. By the time summer arrived, the cottage was better than it had been in years. The roof was new copper that would last another century. The dock was rebuilt with sustainable lumber. The boathouse had been reinforced and painted, my grandfather's old Chris-Craft restored and gleaming inside. On a perfect June morning, I launched the boat for the first time in years. Tom came with me, both of us nervous that the ancient engine wouldn't start. But it roared to life on the second try, strong and steady, and we motored out into the bay with the sun warm on our faces. Frank kept this boat in perfect condition. Tom shouted over the engine noise. Changed the oil religiously. Never missed maintenance. He used to say taking care of what you love is how you show respect. I steered us across the lake, feeling the wheel respond smoothly, The boat cutting through water that sparkled like diamonds. This was freedom. This was the dream my grandfather had built and protected and passed down to me. Not just property but possibility. Not just a house but a life worth living. That summer, I hosted the first annual Frank Coleman Memorial Regatta. 43 boats registered, from tiny sunfish to sleek racing sailboats. Families gathered on the lawn. The Historical Society set up displays about the lake's history. The mayor gave another speech about community and preservation, and the importance of fighting for places that mattered. As the boats raced across the bay, their colorful sails bright against the blue sky, I stood on the dock where my grandfather had stood so many times before. Tom appeared beside me, old and weathered but still strong. He's here, you know, watching all this. Proud of what you've built. I know. I can feel him sometimes. In the wind off the lake, in the way the light hits the water at sunset. He's part of this place now. Always will be. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the boats round the final marker and head for the finish line. Behind us, the cottage glowed in the afternoon sun, exactly as it had for 50 years. Exactly as it would for 50 more if I had anything to say about it. The years that followed brought their own rhythms and challenges. I fell in love with someone who understood why this place mattered, who helped me maintain it without trying to change it. We got married on the dock at sunset, Tom officiating. The whole community gathered to celebrate. We talked about children, about raising them here the way my grandfather had raised me, about passing down not just property but values, not just a house but a way of seeing the world. My mother I heard about only through occasional updates from distant relatives. She'd moved to Arizona, started over completely, worked at a nonprofit helping people rebuild after personal disasters. Someone said she'd found peace there, that she seemed different, softer. I was glad for her but felt no need to reconnect. Some relationships ended and that was okay. Some distances were healthier than proximity. On the 5th anniversary of winning the court case, I did something I'd been planning for years. I established the Frank Coleman Community Foundation, endowed with money from my architectural practice and donations from people who'd been touched by my grandfather's generosity. The foundation would provide grants for historical preservation, support for community gathering spaces, and scholarships for young people studying architecture and construction with an emphasis on integrity and craftsmanship. The first scholarships were awarded that fall to 3 students who reminded me of my grandfather. Kids who cared more about doing things right than doing things fast. Who understood that buildings were more than structures. They were vessels for memory and meaning. Who believed that the work you did in the world mattered more than the money you made doing it. At the ceremony, I told the story of Frank Coleman's mistake and redemption. Told how he'd compromised his values and spent 30 years making amends. Told how he'd taught me that failure wasn't final, that people could change, that integrity meant doing the right thing even when no one was watching. The students listened with the kind of attention that suggested the story meant something to them. Afterward, one came up to me, a young woman from Green Bay studying sustainable architecture. My grandfather made mistakes too, she said quietly. Big ones that hurt people. But he also taught me everything about building, about craftsmanship, about caring for your work. I always wondered if his mistakes canceled out everything else good he did. Your story helped me understand they don't have to. That people are more than their worst moments. That's exactly right, I told her. That's exactly what Frank Coleman would want you to know. As winter approached again, I found myself on the porch one evening, wrapped in blankets, watching the lake freeze. The ice formed slowly, creeping from the shore toward the center, transforming water into solid ground. It was the cycle my grandfather had loved, the way the lake was never static, never finished, always changing between seasons. Tom had passed away that fall, peacefully in his sleep at 89. His funeral had filled the town church, everyone coming to honor the man who'd been Frank Coleman's best friend and my fiercest defender. In his will, he'd left me my grandfather's Navy medals, which Frank had apparently given him for safekeeping years before. Keep these safe for Becca, Frank had told him. When she needs to remember what courage looks like, give them to her. I held those medals now, feeling their weight in my palm. Service in the Pacific during World War II. Years of my grandfather's life I'd never really understood, never asked enough about. But they'd shaped him, taught him about duty and sacrifice and standing up for what mattered even when it cost you everything. He'd carried those lessons through his whole life, through success and failure and ultimate redemption. I would carry them too, into whatever came next, into the life I was building here at the edge of this lake, into the future that was both his legacy and my own creation. The stars emerged as full darkness fell, brilliant in the cold, clear air. Inside the cottage, lights glowed warm. My husband was cooking dinner, probably making too much as always. Soon we'd eat and talk about our days and make plans for tomorrow. Simple things, beautiful things. The kind of life my grandfather had known was the most valuable kind. I stood and walked inside, the warmth enveloping me. The cottage had survived fire and legal battles and people who wanted to destroy it. It had survived because my grandfather built it to last and because I'd been willing to fight for it. But more than that, it had survived because it mattered. Because places like this, built with love and maintained with care and shared with community, were worth fighting for, were worth protecting, were worth passing down to the next generation as proof that some things transcended property value and profit margins, that some things were simply eternally worth it. That night, lying in bed with the lake wind whispering through the pines, I thought about the day I'd stood outside these gates and seen the padlock. The day my mother had banned me from what was legally mine. The day this whole impossible journey had begun. If someone had told me then how it would unfold, I'm not sure I would have believed them. That I'd find my grandfather's hidden warnings and secret documents. That I'd discover decades-old conspiracies and face down criminals and watch my own mother get arrested. That I'd fight for months to defend a legacy under assault from every direction. That I'd win not just in court but in the only way that really mattered, by preserving something beautiful for the people who would come after me. But it had all happened. All of it was real. And the cottage stood, exactly as Frank Coleman had intended. At my mother's trial for my inheritance, she stood in court with her lies and her lawyers and her desperate attempt to rewrite history. She forgot that the land keeps score. That the lake remembers everything. That truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to light. The cottage on Silver Bay still stands, windows glowing against the winter darkness, smoke rising from its chimney into stars. A place of gathering and memory. A place that belongs to everyone who's ever loved it. My name is Rebecca Thompson. And the lake house my mother tried to steal? It's mine. It was always mine. But more importantly, it's ours. Ours to protect and share and pass forward. Ours to fill with laughter and love and the simple beauty of life lived right. That's what Frank Coleman built here. Not just a house but a promise. That some things endure. That some battles are worth fighting. That in the end, love and integrity matter more than property or profit or all the schemes of people who've forgotten what really counts. The lake is sleeping now under winter ice. But come spring it will wake again. The boats will return. Children will learn to sail. Families will gather on the lawn. And this cottage will stand exactly as it has, exactly as it will. Proof that the fight was worth it. That justice, delayed but undeniable, still means something. That my grandfather's faith in me was not misplaced. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.